Good evening, everyone. We would like to welcome you all and thank you for participating in tonight's webinar. My name is Catherine Stager, and I'm the Director of Producer Communications and Influencer Outreach with New York Beef Council. And I also serve as the co-coordinator of the Beef Quality Assurance Program here in New York. My co-coordinators are Dr. Mike Baker of Cornell and Nancy Glazier of Cornell Cooperative Extension. So we are really excited and appreciative of you coming and joining us tonight for this webinar on pre-weaning calf care. We're going to cover a variety of different topics, and I hope that you find this interesting and helpful as we move into the next season of our beef production. While I have you all here, we'll just get started with a little bit of housekeeping. So please feel free to review any questions that you might have. You can use the chat function in the bottom of the Zoom. Also, for those of you who are attending tonight's webinar as part of your beef quality assurance recertification, I would encourage you to take some great notes, to write this down. We are looking to help provide learning opportunities to help you build on the knowledge that you've learned through going through the beef quality assurance training. With your recertification is required every 3 years. If you are in need of it this year, you should have received an email from me with an attached document for documentation. I will still need you to submit in that form, even though I have you down as attending tonight's webinar, because that form also includes some additional important information. On the form, you are basically agreeing and reviewing and continuing your commitment to the beef quality assurance principles. And so we'd like you to review those every 3 years and make sure that you're familiar with what it means to be BQA certified. On the opposite side of the form, there's also a section if you are interested in completing your level 2 certification to have your veterinarian fill out that VCPR form. And that's important because we want to be sure that you are working with a veterinarian and keeping up on your herd health plans and management. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that or about the recertification process. But we are very excited to have Dr. Mike Baker tonight to present and share with us some additional information on pre-weaning calf care. So we are going to jump right into it. So I will let you take it away, Mike. Thank you very much.
So welcome to everybody. Glad you're here. It is that time of year where marketing season for this year's calf crop is right around the corner. So we thought it would be useful to review management practices that you should consider heading into the weaning process. I put this slide up because the most important piece of equipment that you need to have on a beef farm is not your tractor, is not your baler, or all the various sundry equipment. You need to have a handling system. Now, it doesn't need to be this elaborate. This has a squeeze chute and a fairly expensive piece of equipment. You need the head gate, which is this part right here. And then you can easily attach some heavy duty panels on either side and you're good to go. We need ways to get them in, but the whole handling system would be another topic. The importance of this slide is to demonstrate that you need to have some way to handle the cattle that's safe for you, safe for the cattle, and most definitely safe for the veterinarian in the event that you have some issues. So really the success at weaning begins at the calf, as soon as the calf is born. And so we're going to talk just quickly about the topic at birth and throughout the summer. Lots of studies have shown that calves that get sick or have difficulty in terms of the birthing process will be impacted throughout their life into the feedlot phase. So we've got to have facilities for calving. So if you are calving in the wintertime, these are 3 examples. The one up in the left-hand corner, this farmer is somewhere in Vermont, and I've forgotten his name, but he has an excellent situation in that he's got a very hard surface close to bedrock, and then this row of pine trees behind it is what he uses for his calf comfort and care. He puts an electric line so the cows can't get back there, but a bed full of needles from the pine trees provides an excellent cover and for the calves. This on the upper right-hand corner is actually Jim Fravel, you may know. Again, a very simple system, series of wooden calf shelters, and then a windbreak over top to keep the winds down. The one at the bottom, and I think that's in Shenango County, but I can't quite remember. But in any event, it's a hoop structure that he fills with round bales. And then if you can see right up front, in front of the cows, is a system that the cows feed in. So it starts at when the barn's full, essentially, and moves forward as they feed out the hay. So it's a convenient way to feed, but then what's left behind is some bedding, and plus some added bedding makes a very nice, comfortable conditions for the calves. Of course, I'd argue that the cleanest place to have a calf born is on pasture. May not be suitable to your particular management system, but we know that pasture is about the cleanest environment that you can be into. So once calving's done, you need to ensure that the calf gets colostrum. Now in this case, it was a set of twins, and so mom was not taking care of both twins. So the cow had to be put in a head gate and allowed the calves to nurse for a day or two before they got strong enough, both of them to nurse at the same time. What I wanted to show you, and this is not a great picture, but in terms of handling facility, so the head gate is out here, which you can't see. So the cow's got her head in the head gate. But then this is a stand. Preferred makes it so you attach the head gate to this stand. She steps on it so she can't tip it over. And this here is a heavy duty panel which can be slid forward and back if you need to get in to help nurse a calf. So handling systems do not need to be an expensive investment. Okay, practices at birth. Getting the navel dipped. Most veterinarians recommend that, but there is some, I wouldn't say controversy, but difference of opinion about that. We are in a selenium deficient area, so BOCI administration to the calf at birth just assures that that calf has that supplementation. Castration and dehorning is best done at birth if you can do that. It's the least stressful time in the calf's life. But in your situation, if you're working by yourself, that may not be something that would work in. Clostridium is an important vaccine at birth. We have blackleg, and seems like we're seeing more of it, and that will help to prevent that. What we're seeing too is this intranasal vaccine given at birth. This Enforce, Nasalgen, there's a couple of brand names out there, but it just gives that calf some immediate immunity. And the nice thing about these intranasal vaccines is they're not impacted by maternal antibodies. So in other words, some vaccines, if you give them within 3 months of birth, the maternal antibodies will not allow those vaccines to work as well. This one is not one of those. And then of course, ear tagging, unless you're an extremely small operation and you have different colored calves, so you know which cow has which calf, that's important. So this is really a lot of things to do at birth. So you can only imagine that if you have very aggressive cows, that's going to be a challenge. But this is something that should be working towards. And this, all of what I'm recommending is to be done in consultation with your veterinarian.
Dr. Baker, while you're still on that slide, there was a question about hot iron debudding at birth or using the paste. What's your kind of recommendation on dehorning?
The only issue with paste, and both systems work fine, the paste is often used or can be used in a dairy situation, but the calf is not nursing the mother. In a beef situation, that's not the case. So if some of that paste would get onto the udder of the cow, that's not a good situation. So it's something you just need to keep in mind if you are going to use the paste. Good question. So summertime. This is a good year where nutrition has been pretty important. Many parts of the state have been under drought conditions, and the availability of forage has just not been there. And so the importance of supplementing those cows while they're nursing those calves is important for the health of the calf and the future health of that calf as well. Mineral supplementation goes without saying. We need to have a good, generally a loose mineral in front of that cow herd. Blocks are more convenient, but it's difficult for the cow and calf to really get enough out of that mineral block because it's so hard. Fly control, that's a real challenge. No one method works to control flies. It needs to be a combination. So whether that's feed through insecticides, several of them are safe for dung beetles, fly tags, back rubbers, spray-ons, a number of things. So that's a challenge. And again, work with your veterinarian to come up what's best, but also what's most convenient. Because getting the cows up to spray them, well, that's probably one of the most effective fly control methods, but doesn't always fit in with the management system. And this is another good time in the summer to think about this intranasal vaccine. Summer pneumonia is not uncommon. The issue with it is we don't always see it. The calf may not exhibit typical signs of pneumonia where you know the calf is really sick because he's out there with mom doing some grazing and having some issues. And those sometimes can be the calves that end up at weaning time being smaller, just not as thrifty. Well, they've had some lung damage and that's still carrying through. So if that's a practice that you can work on, that certainly has been proven to be beneficial.
While you're on this slide, there was, sorry. While you're on this slide, there was a question about mineral recommendations and if there was an affordable loose mineral in particular that you would recommend.
Well, yeah, you can buy cheap mineral for sure. But lots of times they have the wrong concentration of salt. Salt is what encourages or discourages intake. And so if there's too much salt, they won't eat it. And if there's not enough, then they're going to eat too much of it. So you got to be wary about cheaper loose minerals. I mean, a good loose mineral is going to cost between $800 and $1,000 a ton. If I could do my math quickly, I'd tell you what it was, but that's the ton price. And so as brands names, you know, there's some good ones out there. Purina has one. There's several other good ones out there. The other thing you need to take into consideration too is how weatherproof they are. So if they get wet and then cake up and the cattle won't eat them, then that's not good. They make some really good mineral feeders. They're round with a flap on them, and the cattle learn real quickly to nose up that flap so they can get in to the mineral, but the flap comes back down, so if it rains, it doesn't get in there into them. So, yeah, the sling's got to, some folks will get very complex with their mineral in terms of trying to take forage samples and matching the mineral to the forage. And right honestly, taking forage samples as representative of what cows are eating is not very accurate. Cows are selective grazers, even on a very intensive rotational system, and the pastures, the lots are going to change from one to one. So that's a challenge. So just, if it's $500 a ton, be concerned about it. But again, just in that price, that's what you're looking at. Not a lot of specifics because there's all kinds of things about minerals. So if you want to contact me after, please do, and we can talk more specifics for your farm. So prior to weaning, the calves need to be used to eating out of a bunk or a hay feeder other than just pasture. And they need to be used to drinking out of a water tank or automatic water. If they've been drinking out of a pond or a creek all summer, and all of a sudden they're put in a condition where they're drinking well water or city water, it's going to be a whole deal that's different to them. And water is probably one of the most important nutrients at weaning than any of the ones we talk about. So if they don't have an adequate intake of water, you're going to have more issues with the process of weaning. Bunk broke, again, they just need to learn how. And I'm not a big fan of creep feeding. By and large, it doesn't pay if you look at the feed conversion and the weight gain you get. But pre-weaning is a time when I would recommend, if that's set up for you, to do some creep feeding, because it gets them used to eating something besides pasture. Vaccinations, Dr. Wilson and Lynch talked last week about vaccinations, so I won't go into any detail there. You have the video from that Catherine will make available, and then I'll get into those details. And dewormed. So those are the main things that we want to think about pre-weaning. Preconditioning is kind of something similar. Again, they're weaned, bunk and water broke, same type of deal that you're going to do pre-weaning, vaccinated. And one of the things to think about is getting those calves weaned prior to the sale. And the minimum recommendation is 30 days. And many programs now are going to 60-day weaning. The problem with some systems I've seen is wean for 15 days and then send them either to the next owner or through the sale barn. Problem is the incubation period for these pneumonia diseases, which are the most prevalent, is about 15 days. So you're sending them when they're ready to break, if they're going to, with these vaccinations. So keep them 30 days. If you're set up, keep them 60 days. And then, of course, it wouldn't be appropriate if I didn't mention BQA. Y'all should be certified in BQA. Catherine and Nancy can help you get that done. And there's a number of ways to do that. BQA is beef quality assurance, excuse me. Why do we wean? You know, when I first put this slide together, I put animal welfare at the bottom. But the more I thought about it, it really needs to be at the top. Calves that are healthy, lower stressed, don't get sick, that's good animal welfare. And that is something we really need to think about, regardless of all the other things, regardless of whether they're worth more money or not. We need to make sure that that calf stays as healthy and comfortable as possible throughout his life. You know, it's the old adage that we take really good care of our cattle, they have an excellent life in one bad day. And so that's something that we need to keep in mind. What can we do to make sure these cattle are healthy and comfortable throughout? So the other issue, of course, is fewer health problems. If we've given the vaccines ahead of time, if we've incorporated management ahead of time so that weaning is less stressful with fewer health problems, we're going to use less antibiotics. And we all know the concern that consumers have about the use of antibiotics. So if we can accomplish that with cattle that don't get sick, we don't use antibiotics. And that's an excellent thing. And then finally, done right, these cattle, these calves are worth more money. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But this was a quote that I took from Tom Brink, who's with the Red Angus Association. He said, fewer and fewer backgrounders or feedlots have neither the patience nor the labor force to babysit non-weaned calves. And, you know, we think about labor, you know, we've gone from square bales to big round bales to big square bales, and that's all driven by labor. Feedlots are doing the same thing. The margins are thin enough that anytime they can cut their labor force down, they're going to do that. And one of the ways they do that is buying calves that are low risk, less likely to get sick. So the money deal. So this was a Cattle Facts survey of their members. And so we've got the high return producers in red compared to the low return producers. And so when we look at shipping calves off the cow, 25% of the low income producers, that's what they do. If we look at weaning from 1 to 44 days, 30% of the low income producers do that. If we look at those calves that are weaned 45 days, we're looking at 69, almost 70% of high return producers engage in that management practice. So it tells you that those that are making money know the importance of that, or of backgrounding these calves at least 45 days prior to putting them into the market channel. Well, that's fine, Cattle Facts, you know, big numbers, big ranches, what about us? Well, this is some data from last December. We had two groups, well, there's more than that, but we had identified groups, which I'm calling value added. They had their vaccines, a very strict protocol. They were weaned at least 30 days. They had some reputation. They had been sold before, so the buyers knew the value of them. So these value-added calves were worth $773 a head. These non-value-added calves, and this even includes some of the what are labeled coming into the sale as preconditioned or vaccinated, but you have to be careful if you're a buyer. Many of those calves will come in with a shot in June of a killed vaccine that was never modified. So essentially, they're not pre-vaccinated whatsoever. That vaccine was just a waste of your money. So, but anyhow, putting in the remainder of these non-value-added calves, they weighed just about the same, a little bit lighter, 20 cents per pound less, $641 a head for a difference of $132 a head. So to argue that you can't afford to vaccinate and wean the calves and hold them for at least 30 days just doesn't hold. $132, it costs between $15 and $20 for the vaccines at best. If you're keeping them for 45 days, yeah, you've got some feed put into them, but they're also gaining weight. So you're going to be selling heavier calves. So there's 21% difference in the value of those two sets of cattle. So we can get those prices even in New York. So part of the beef quality assurance program is that NCBA funds what's called a national beef quality audit. And they just gather a whole bunch of information from the retailer all the way back to the cow-calf producer on the things that are good, things that are bad, about the cattle that their particular enterprise deals with or the retailer gets. And one of the things that came out in the last audit was that we as producers need to have more protocols in place. So I just want to take a minute to show you how simple they are to put together. And protocols are good because in the cow-calf business, you essentially wean once a year. So I don't know about you, but you can see my gray hair, and I can't remember exactly what I did 12 months ago when I weaned these calves. So having this together really helps me to make sure I'm doing the proper management. It's also a way I personally meet with my veterinarian every year. We go over these protocols. We talk about what has changed either in the herd health or certain diseases that are showing up or new vaccines that have been shown to be more effective. And so we put this together. So this is a template. You need the name, protocol, standard operating procedure, farm name, obviously, the number, who has written it, the dates involved, equipment and supplies needed. That's probably the most important part in terms of trying to remember what you're doing. And then who's trained on the farm to do this process. So here's my personal one from our farm for pre-weaning. So it's Wooded Acre Farm. It's number 3. Alex Navarro, Dr. Alex Navarro is my veterinarian. So he and I wrote this. These are the dates. We revised it June of this year. And this is what we need: a cooler with ice packs for vaccines. We use Bovishield One Shot and Alpha 7, Ivermectin, so on and so forth. You can see down the line what we do. Now our calves are banded, castrated when they're about 3 months of age, and that's because I've worked by myself, and accomplishing all those activities at birth is a challenge. But we do bring the whole herd in when the calves are approximately 3 months to apply fly tags, intranasal vaccine to the calves, replace any tags that are missing. And so on our farm, that's a really good place to, a really good time to castrate. Dehorning's done the same way if we have any, we don't have horns. But Alex Navarro, again, he's at the Perry Clinic. Myself and my partners are the ones trained in doing this. So very simple to put together and very useful from year to year. And you should have a protocol for anything major: calving time, weaning, foot rot, pink eye. Any of those major events that are occurring in your herd should have a written protocol so you are implementing the best practices that you can. Okay, weaning itself. There's a bunch of different strategies. One is just taking the cows and sending them out to the back 40 and leaving the calves at the barn. The other is to remove the calves. So you put the calves somewhere differently. Switching cows, I haven't seen that done a whole lot. And quite honestly, there is some literature out there, but it's not conclusive, where you take a set of cows, wean their calves, those weaned calves, go with the other set of cows that have weaned their calves. So essentially you've got weaned calves with cows that are not their dams and vice versa. The concept being, if they're with an adult cow, they feel less stress. What's become more popular is this fence line weaning. The concept where you have a good fence, whether it be a good physical barrier or a good electric, cows are on one side, the calves are on the other, so they can see each other, they just can't get together. And that seems to be the less stressful operation operation for weaning. Balling seems to be less. If that's an indication of stress, that would indicate that that's working. The other is these weaners that you insert in the nose of the calf. So when the calf reaches up to nurse, that flap comes down, and so the calf can't get attached to the teat. It works. The challenge with it is you need to leave those in no more than 10 days and preferably only 4 or 5. So that means you need to get the calves in, put them in, short time later, take them out. Anytime you run calves through a chute, especially calves because they've not been through it before much, it's a stressor for them. So it's one more step in weaning that probably is not worth the effort and the increased stress as compared to using fence line weaning. Okay, once they're weaned, fresh water, as I said, that's probably the most important nutrient. One common practice to make sure that calves get water is that you put a water tank in the perimeter of the weaning area. Calves will always walk the perimeter looking for mom. So if that's in the perimeter, they're going to run into it and therefore more likely to take a drink. Bunk space needs to be 18 to 24 inches per head. And that's even true if you're just feeding baleage. They all need to get up and have access to eat whenever they want to. If you can feed several times a day, that's always good. Anytime new feed is introduced or feed you fed in the morning is pushed up, depending on your setup, that gets their curiosity and they'll come to the bunk more often. If you're going to feed a concentrate, then you need to feed about 1 to 1.5% of their body weight, which is for a 500-pound calf, that's about 5 to 7 pounds. You want a full feed, high quality grass hay, not alfalfa, but high quality second cutting or very early cut, first cut to these calves. And you can also feed baleage if it's a grass baleage. That's similar to what they've been grazing, so that oftentimes work. If you're going to feed dry hay and you want to feed grain and get them introduced to it, it's recommended that you put the hay in the trough and then pour grain on top of it. This year, dusty lots have been a problem in the drought areas. And so if it's dusty, you need to find a different area because dust aggravates the nasal cavities and the lungs. And that's, of course, where these pneumonias occur. So keeping them out of the dust is really important. So the performance goals that you want to try to achieve on the cow, the calf is gaining roughly 2.5 to 2.25 pounds a day. Cow's milk, good pasture. So we want to keep these calves gaining at a minimum of 2 pounds a day. And the reason for that is that we know that calves that were gaining on pasture this 2+ pounds a day, if they go to a system that now they're dropped down to 1.5 pounds a day, that affects quality of the carcass later on, believe it or not. So as we've talked earlier, all of this is linked together. So how do we accomplish that? Well, one of the concept is this whole idea of pasture weaning. So after about 2 weeks in a lot, they're kind of settled down. They know the routine. And then if you have pasture available, if you've planned for it, turning them back out to pasture so they're on a diet that they have been comfortable with. Cover crops has gotten to be a popular practice for crop farmers. And so using, rye or oats or whatever they're happening to use can be a good source of feed if the crop farmer is so inclined. This is a pretty big pasture of oats that were used. You can see the front fence, which is the division fence, so these cattle are rotated. There doesn't need to be a back fence because this really isn't growing back too much, but a forward fence is only this single strand of poly rope. The external fence are two strands of tape. And really, once they got going and used to that hot electric, and that's the other important thing, it's got to be very hot, getting out was not an issue. The biggest issue was deer going through and taking it down. So the calves did need to be seen every day, or the fence needed to be seen every day and make sure that the deer had not taken it down. But very good forage and can work well. The other nice thing is cattle are really good at grazing through the snow. And you can see these calves grazing the oats with probably 6 inches of snow. And so this helps with water. That's one of the issues, obviously, on a crop field. There's probably not water available easily, so water has to be hauled. But in lush forage and in snow conditions, their regular water intake is greatly reduced. And so this can be a good practice to work. So if you want to feed some grain, if that's part of your management, part of your market, more importantly later on, these are some of the general recommendations. It needs to be about a 14% crude protein mix. You can use hay, that's in that 12 to 14% crude protein range. And again, feeding that 5 to 7.5 pounds a day for that 500-pound calf. These are some rations that you can have made at your local mill or make them yourself. Ration 1 is whole shell corn, 60%, whole oats, and whoops, that's an error. So whole oats and then 10% soybean. Ration 2 is cracked shell corn with this 15% soy. You can also use distiller's grain, dried distiller's grain. You just need to do some math. Distiller's grain is about 38% protein compared to soybean meal, which is 50. So depending on the price difference, either or will work just fine. Ration 3 is whole oats, rolled barley, and again, soybean meal to provide some protein. Or you can buy pellets that are completely built, and so you only have to worry about feeding one ingredient. Those obviously are a little more expensive. And those that I just went over can be fed to calves on grass and can really boost gain while they're on grass. And these recommendations are from Dr. Ed Rayburn. He's down at West Virginia and kind of a premier agronomist as it relates to livestock production. And this is just a list of the things that he recommends. Again, this 4 to 5 pounds of supplement. You choose the most fertile soils because that's where the highest palatability as well as quality of the forage is. You only need less than half an acre for a 500-pound calf. It's getting late at this point to think about that on a pasture, because he mentions 5 to 6 weeks before weaning to mow or graze the area. We're probably past that window. But y'all, just like with rotational grazing with your herd, you always want them in this 4 to 6 inches of pasture. He recommends, if you do want to fertilize and you have less than 30% legume, then you can use some nitrogen. And then finally, cow herd can be used to clean up that extra grass that the calves didn't graze. That can be a little bit of a challenge because you've just weaned the calves and now you've got the cows on the other side of the fence, or you've really staggered it so they're not close to each other. But something to think about. Grazing on grass, or I'm sorry, weaning on grass has shown to work really well. West Virginia has done a number of trials with that, and it's worked quite well. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. It's not exactly related to weaning, but this question of what are calves going to bring this fall is coming up more and more this time of year. And so first thing I want you to understand is that over the last 20 years, an index for the price of 550-pound calves looks like this blue line. So an index is just comparing the price of the calf at different times of the year relative to the average. So this is saying that, you know, between April and May, that this 550-pound calf is almost 4% higher than the average. This point is showing that it's near, in November, it's almost 4% lower than the average. Well, when do we sell calves? We sell them right here. It's the worst time of year to sell calves. And so this links back to keeping those calves for 35, 45, 60 days till we start getting higher prices. And you can see what happens after the first of the year, the prices continue to climb. So important to understand that concept. But we can also use this index to project what the price of the calf might be this fall. And so using this index, we use a formula, and Catherine has these slides, which I know she'll send out as well as it being recorded. We take the price of the sale month. So I picked November. So we're going to sell these calves in November. What's the price right now, mid-September? And then we take that index of when we're going to sell them divided by the current index. So what that means is the current price right now for 551-pound calves is about $1.21, give or take here and there. The November index for the month we want to sell is 0.95. The index for September, the current month, is 1. You do the math and you come up with the projected price in November of $1.15. Doesn't sound very good, but I've got some better news. So there's another way, and you can use the futures market. And some people grouse about the futures market because it's all this investor money. But they're the men and women that are putting their money where their mouth is in terms of what they think prices are going to be in the future. So I put a lot of stock in what they're saying and watch the futures market, especially how it's moving. And the good news is for these 550-pound calves, or the feeder index, the feeder futures, which is a 650 to 750, has been moving up. And so that's a good sign. But that being said, so we take the feeder cattle futures and minus our basis. Our calf prices, like it or not, are generally 25 to 35% or cents lower than the market, lower than the futures market. It's just the way it is. We don't have large groups to sell. We don't have as many cattle. We only have 100,000 cows in the state, and there's counties in the west that have that many cows in their county. So it makes it harder to put large groups together. So that's part of the reason. Freight's another part. Takes us, we've got a freight bill to get them to the Midwest or the far west where they're being fed. And a lot of this futures is based on lower freight prices. So that's the way it is. So the futures price for November, looking ahead, is $1.42. Well, as I said, that is for a 650 to 750 pound animal. So we need to add 10 cents to that because we're dealing with a lighter animal at 550 compared to this heavier animal. So if we then subtract that basis, we're looking at $1.27 to $1.37. Much better than the $1.15 we looked at earlier. So
Dr. Baker,
one other way to, yeah.
We had two questions come in. So while you're on this topic, and you can slide them in depending on the slides that you have coming up, when would you say is the best time to sell calves? And would 550 pounds be the average weight for a post-weaned calf, or what's typically the average that we see coming through, or what should our goal be, I guess, for weight for post-weaned calves?
You know, the old standard rule of thumb is the cow ought to wean a calf, excuse me, that's half her body weight. So if it's a 1,200 pound cow, that's 7 months of age, and many producers wean earlier, but at 7 months of age, that calf ought to weigh 600 pounds. The reality is we don't see that quite so often. We're calving later. And so if you're calving in April, May, and June and still insist on selling in November, you're probably going to be selling a 500 pound calf. Now, if you background that calf, keep it for that 60 days, and it's gaining 1.5 to 2 pounds a day, you're going to add a significant amount of weight. And so then that calf is being marketed, even though it's heavier, it's being marketed at a higher point in that feeder index that I showed you. So that's the goal, is to hold on to them. And it all depends, right? Good extension answer. If the price of corn is really low, then cattle feeders are more interested in buying lighter weight calves because they feel that they can put the weight on cheaper than buying the weight. If the price of corn is high, then they want to let you put the weight on, and then they'll buy them at heavier weights. So I'm talking about buying them at 600 or 700 versus buying them at 800 or 900. So you've got to do some figuring. You've got to watch the market. You got to think about what corn prices are, and that will help you determine the answer. But if your only play is to sell calves in November because that's the easiest time to get them caught, don't want to feed them hay, don't want to feed them grain, then that's probably not the best decision overall. Sometimes, some years it is. It's like Daryl Field from Oklahoma State told us in our Stalker short course. Someone came up to him and told him the exact thing, that he buys stalkers in May and he sells them in October. Is that a good plan? And he said, well, like any football team, that's one plan. You need to have several plans based on the conditions. And same with selling calves. And that's becoming even more important as we go ahead, and I'll mention that here in a minute. So does that answer those two questions well enough? If not, chime in or chat again. Okay.
We'll definitely have time for questions. So if you think of any, feel free to type them in, or at the end, we'll open it up and anybody can ask any questions you might have.
Yes, please. So the final way to look at the projected calf price is something called beef calfbasis.com. And you can do an internet search and it'll come right up. And it's a tool that takes into account the futures price, takes into account the corn price, takes into account how many cattle you're selling. The disadvantage of this, so you have to pick where you're going to sell the calves. And unfortunately, the closest state that has conditions similar to us in terms of environment is Tennessee. Virginia used to be there, and that would have been better, but because Virginia doesn't provide enough information, they got dropped out. So that being said, I use Tennessee. And so what they look at, again, given what I just mentioned, is they're saying that the calves sold in Tennessee in November will have a 6.63 basis, which means the price will be higher than what they're currently receiving based on the futures market. Or the futures market will be higher based on what the current calf price is. This is a lot of detail. We'll get to the bottom line here in a minute. So they're expecting a cash price of $1.48 with this kind of interval. Again, we need to take off our basis, which puts us at $1.23 to $1.33. So let's put this all together. So using the index only, we're estimating a price of $1.15. Using the adjusted feeders, we're looking at 27 to 37. Using basis 23 to 33. Last November, our price was $1.22. Most analysts are saying that prices this fall will be equal to or slightly higher than last fall. So putting that all together, I think we can look for feeder calf prices, steers, should have mentioned that, steers weighing 550 pounds can be somewhere in this $1.22 to $1.27 price for the commodity type calf. Now again, as I showed in that earlier slide, for those that have been weaned a minimum of 30 days, a very strict vaccination protocol, bunk broke, water broke, all of those positive management practices, we can easily be up in this higher range. So a little, basically similar to last year. So just looking here, a quick future that I picked up from, I can't remember which author, but his comment was, the future of beef production lies in moving further up the chain. So, like it or not, a cow-calf operation, the price they receive for their calves most years is what's left over from what the pecker makes, what the feed yard makes, what the backgrounder grazer makes, and then what's left the cow-calf gets. So your goal should be looking to the future is how can I move further up that chain? So can I keep my calves for 60 days and get further up closer to what weight and conditions buyers are looking for? Or do I keep them over in grazing and therefore take advantage of cheap grass gain in the summertime? And then the ultimate is, do I retain ownership? And there's some years that makes a whole lot of sense, especially if you've got really good genetics that you know will perform well in the feed yard and grade well. So the other thing we have to think about in New York is this idea of working together. We just don't have enough calves, especially feeder calves. Very few are sold in large lots. In fact, the average lot size, believe it or not, is still 1 to 2 calves coming through the sale ring. And if a buyer has to sit there for a whole day to get a potload of cattle, he certainly is going to discount what he's paying for them. But if he can buy 40 calves or 80 calves in 2 bids and be done, then that's much more appealing to that buyer. So whether it's through pooling amongst producers, there's a number of ways to think about doing that. We just completed a yearling board sale, and this was a sale for basically calves coming off a grazing or stocker program. That was 2 weeks ago, September 12th, and those cattle sold pretty close to what the average price in Virginia was. And we don't see that very often. So it just tells you, and we had three truckload lots. That means 50,000 pounds. And we had 3 half-load lots, which is around 30,000 pounds. And that just tells, and the good news is both buyers were in state. So we do have buyers in our state that will buy big lots of cattle. We just need to figure out how to present them in the way that they want them. So that's my soapbox on marketing. And that ends my presentation, and happy to answer questions through chat or unmute your mic and let's have a discussion, I guess.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Baker. I'll let you all think about some questions that you might have on the various topics that we covered tonight. I do see one that just popped up. It said, at what age do you recommend castration if you do not castrate at birth?
BQA standards say less than 3 months. Castration and dehorning are very stressful events. A number of producers believe that they will castrate after weaning or not castrated and send them to the sale with the idea that these calves are heavier. And if lots of research has been done in this, if you take a group of bulls that were castrated under 3 months of age and a set of bulls that weren't castrated until they were 7 months, those 7-month bulls will certainly be heavier than the ones castrated at 3 months. But those bulls got to get castrated sometime. So if the buyer buys them or you do your own castration, within a month to 6 weeks, the bulls and the steers weigh the same. So there's, from again, getting back to animal welfare, think about what you'd like your non-farm neighbor to help you with. Castration at 3 months, birth preferably, or 600 pounds, especially if you're using a knife. So to me, it's an animal welfare issue. BQA, it's an animal welfare issue, and we need to be cognizant of that.
We have another question here about, well, first off, can you touch a little bit about animal identification and ear tags in general? And then a question about any status update on requirements referring to RFID ear tags.
I was afraid somebody was going to ask that. Cattle going into the marketplace, have to have what we call a 840 tag, which identifies them back to their origin. Technically, they're supposed to be done before they leave the farm and go to the sale barn. Right now, what's happening is the sale barn are putting them in, and what they're putting in is those metal tags. And from a worker standpoint, to me, that makes a whole lot more sense. Because if you've got a calf, cow, bull, whatever it is, and you're trying to read that metal tag so you can record it, it's dangerous. And so by them having the metal tag, they can read the number, write it down on the paperwork, and then put it in, is the most safe way for the workers at the sale barn. The RFID tags are coming, and someone on here may actually know this better. the reason I can't keep it straight is because we keep going back and forth. One time it was all set to go, and then it got pushed back. But just to know that RFID tags are coming. In fact, I believe, I don't know if this COVID thing has shut that down, but the Ag and Markets, New York State Ag and Markets, was providing, I think, up to 200 RFID tags for free. So that's a question I need to check into, get more details. But as far as the management tags, which are yours, so you can identify the cow and calf, I think they're absolutely necessary to know which cow is producing the best calf. We're small enough farms we can do it. If you were trying to manage 600 cows on the range, then you'd have a good excuse, I guess. But there's really no reason for us not to do that.
Your RFD tags that you guys are talking about, are them recommended for people that are doing cow-calf combinations for their own sales? Or are they just for people that are selling in the auction barns?
You are correct. So if you're maintaining ownership all the way through to the market, a private market, direct market, then you don't need the RFID tags.
So just your normal personal ID tags are fine for that, correct? I know you're VQI certified and everything.
Yeah, because they can track that back to you, and that's
okay.
The main purpose of the tags. Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was on the right page with that one.
Yep. And you know, for larger operations, the RFID tags are really a handy management tool, especially if you're weighing the cattle. So instead of having to write down the animal's number and then have to write down the animal's weight, that can be wanded in. That's certainly an expense. You know, a decent scale and indicator is going to cost $1,500 to $1,600. The wand to collect that data is probably another $4 or $5. So you're looking at $2,000. But if you're running cattle through on a pretty regular basis, it can reduce a lot of time and entry as well as error. So.
Right.
Well, very good. While you think of any last minute questions or a second round of questions, I just want to review really quick some of the topics that we touched on today in terms of your beef quality assurance certification. I believe many of you are attending this webinar as a form of continued education for recertification, but if you happen to just come across the webinar and you are not yet beef quality assurance certified, or you maybe attended a long time ago, but it wasn't within the last 3 years and you never recertified, it would be great to get re-involved in the program. It's something that the industry is really moving towards, really pushing towards, to utilize this program not only to improve the beef quality, the quality of the beef that we're producing on the farm, but also as a communication technique to share our story with our consumers. The more producers that I have here in New York that are beef quality assurance certified, that's a strong story that I can then turn around and share when we're doing consumer outreach and events. So I encourage you to visit nybeef.org under our Farmers Fence post. You can start there and see if there's any in-person trainings that are coming up in your area, or there is also a online training at bqa.org, which gets you started on your certification, and that's kind of a go at your own pace, completely online. So, and I think I just saw a question pop up about whether that was for just New York residents, and that bqa.org is across the entire country. That's why it's such a great program to be a part of. It's a great story for us to share in terms of sharing our messaging with consumers, to know that they find a lot of comfort in knowing that there's a program such as this, that our farmers are involved and care about the animals that they are producing and the quality of the beef that they're producing. So like I said, if you aren't certified or you have questions about certification, please go visit one of those 2 websites to get that certification started. And if you are utilizing this training as a recertification, which is required every 3 years, you can go ahead and complete the form that I'm going to be sending out after tonight's webinar. And like I mentioned, you send that in every 3 years, you'll get some information back from us, and we'll be in touch to keep, the idea is to keep building on what we cover in our trainings. So feel free to reach out. I have been co-coordinator with Mike for many years, and more recently, Nancy Glazier from Cornell is transitioning into that co-coordinator role. So we're both here to help you if you have any questions about the program. And I think that we're good to go. Any additional comments, Dr. Baker or Nancy?
Well, thanks everybody for joining in tonight, and thanks Mike and Catherine.
Yeah. Yes, thank you all very much.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you all taking the time. Thank you very much, Dr. Baker, for putting together this presentation. I hope that you all picked up a new bit of information to build off of the knowledge that you've learned about the Beef Quality Assurance Program and taking care of and producing high quality beef with your animals. So feel free to reach out with any additional questions. We will hang around for a couple of minutes if you have anything pop up that you would like to connect with anyone on.